There's plenty of things out there. 401ks, employee stock purchase plans, bonuses, and all that. That seems to be window dressing. But at the end of the day, Grant Cardone's buying a jet, not having an employee who's got a mansion. Tired of watching your portfolio swing wildly with every tweet from Wall Street? There's a smarter way. At Vondi Capital, we help investors like you move beyond the chaos of stocks into steady, recession-proof cash flow from self-storage. No drama, no panic selling, just consistent income that keeps paying no matter what the market does. Ready to get off the roller coaster? Book a free strategy call today at vondicapital.com. That's VONDIE capital.com. Mention the podcast to jump the line. It's another Control, Alt, Invest. I'm your host, Jason Vondersmith. I'm here with James Goodwillie. James, how's it going?
Going great.
You know, I ask you every time, how's it going?
Same response.
You're always doing great.
Monday.
Oh, it's supposed to be... I'm not supposed to give away when we recorded.
I think that's fine.
We drop them on Friday, so it's supposed to be...
Yeah.
Today's Friday.
Yeah, everyone knows that you don't just release the same day, right?
Oh.
At least I think so.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is a big week. It's a scary week. Taxes are due tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get your taxes filed?
I got my extension filed.
Beautiful.
I'm an extension guy.
Just kick that can down the road.
Yeah.
What's more patriotic than paying taxes, they say?
Well, a lot of things in my book, but...
Give me 3 things more patriotic than paying taxes.
Oh, bald eagle.
Uh-huh.
American flag, 4th of July.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you that one.
All right.
Taxes are something that's snuck up on me personally.
Mm-hmm.
It's a funny evolution because when you're young, there's all sorts of ads and like every year it's like, bring your refund check and buy a new car or buy a new mattress. When you're working at a grocery store, you know, when you're going through college, stuff like that, it kind of operates like that. Like you don't have to, you're like, oh yeah, I got a few hundred, even if it's a few $100, it's like I got a refund check.
Yeah.
And then you get out in the real world. I remember the first time, I've told you sort of my evolution. I went from a out of school job and then I did commission-based sales. So even then it wasn't like, I don't remember if we got refunds, but it wasn't like you owe a lot. When I got into the world of data and actually started making a decent, what I would consider a decent adult salary, the very first year, we hired out somebody to do our taxes, and he was like, okay, you owe, like it was like a few $1,000s.
Right.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
That was the first time that ever happened to me.
That you ever owed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And owed like what felt to be a significant amount.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the worst.
So we can talk about a million things today.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a couple things I want to go in on.
Yeah.
As we do.
Oh, yeah.
But this time of year, well, other than extending?
Yeah.
So let's pretend it's October 15th, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
For you.
For me, yeah. Yeah. Taxes are, especially like as a business owner, they're always just a pain in the ass. Always a pain in the ass. And I always, for the longest time, tried to do it myself. Then I realized, and I think this is a good kind of segue into the episode, but I had a story kind of like yours, except it was a little bit different. Whereas I would do my own taxes whenever I had my own businesses throughout the years, and I would do it myself, and I'd always owe money, always. And then the most recent business I had.
You sound like a terrible tax guy then.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not the way it's supposed to be.
That's right. Then I hired someone to do it for me. His company. I was so nervous. I was like, oh, we're going to have to, because we were bringing in a lot. We were doing great. And I was so nervous we're going to have to spend so much on taxes. And then it came back and we got like $7,000 the refund. And I was like, whoa. And lo and behold, it's because of all like the things that tax professionals can do to wiggle through the 4 million lines of tax code in the United States that I had no idea about and that any of these online tax services don't really cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you owe the IRS $100,000 in back taxes? We can help. I like that ad.
Yeah.
One of my favorite memes. That's one of my goals for this podcast is to start talking about memes I like.
Okay.
So get ready for that.
All right.
I guess because of the time of year, there's one floating around that's like, here's how taxes work. The government says you owe us money, but you have to figure out how much. And the person's like, well, you know how much, right? Like, no, you tell us, but if you're wrong, you're going to jail or you're getting fined. Have you seen?
Yeah.
I think I botched exactly how it plays out.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I think that's really funny, and it makes me think of the different services. If you could do your own, you could do the TurboTax thing. You could go to H&R Block. You could go to Tom's tax service down the road, and you're going to get 3 different answers, right?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And I know people want to revamp what we're doing, and the current administration is laying off the IRS as we speak, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, that's
a decent amount.
Yeah, that's pretty good. You're talking about getting your country out of debt. Not that I'm not advocating for all of us citizens to chip in extra. We got to figure it out. But this time, we need to get out of debt. And you're like, let's fire the debt collectors.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I always hate it though, just because it's like debt collectors, but it's not our own debt, right? Like the citizens aren't responsible for the stupid decisions that the government made and racking up their own debt. So why are they, why do they feel the need to take that from us in order to pay off their own debts? It's kind of crazy.
I like that my kids can go to school. I don't have to pay for that.
Yeah.
Well, we pay, but
yeah. I
like that when it snows, they get plowed. I like when there's a pothole, they put something over it.
Yeah. Like having, police if somebody breaks into your house.
You have somebody break into your house?
No.
What neighborhood do you live in?
We don't have to talk about that.
We got to get you out.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's very hard to hold that money accountable as a voter.
Yeah. Taxes in general, it's kind of always blow my mind because we're essentially saying that the government can spend our money better than we can, which is crazy to think about. Like no one, I bet if you polled every single American in the entire United States, you might get 20% that agree with that statement. I would put probably good money that 80% or more would be like, no, the government can't spend money better than I can. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing, right? They put a percentage on how much we make and say, all right, you've done well for yourself. You're going to pay us this amount. You've done even better than that. You're going to pay us this amount. And then we're going to spend that. And we're going to spend it because we know what's best and we know how to spend this money. And it's like, we're going to go spend it on a multi-billion-dollar Department of Defense contract, and we're going to pay $50,000 per laptop for the Department of Defense when you could go to Best Buy and buy that exact same laptop for $500. And it's like, what?
You ever go on a all guys like out of town golf trip?
Mm-hmm.
And you know how when you do that, either beforehand or after, you're like, okay, lodging was X dollars, the course, I'll pick up lunch today, you pick up lunch tomorrow. And then you kind of just figure it all out and you get a rough number. And at the end of the trip, everybody kind of settles up. They're like, hey, I need 100 from you, 200 from you, etc.
Yeah.
You ever do that with, I'm about to be polarizing. You ever do that with women?
Explain.
I've found personally that when I go to either book a trip or we're doing something with other couples, when certain personality types, let's go with that.
Okay.
That women usually have more than men, scientifically speaking. Okay, this is not my opinion.
Right.
Scientists have proven that women are more likely to be this personality type than guys. That's where I'm going with this.
Okay.
And shoot me an email if you need that back up because I have it.
Yeah.
It's like, like the laptop. Oh, well, I don't want to go to that restaurant because it's $15 for a drink and the other one's 12. Or I didn't have any of that appetizer. So I don't want to chip in for that. Like, can we?
Oh,
And then
yeah.
like if you go out to dinner, the bill starts going around and it's like everyone's got a calculator out. It's like, can we just figure it out? Round off the number. Are you with me on this?
Yeah.
Like, okay. That's, I think, an example of what you're saying with the government spending our money. If we did not have that, imagine you're in a little town. Let's say you're in a town with 200 people and you need a new school. Someone's like, let's put in marble floors. And someone's like, the kids don't need floors. They just need chairs to sit in.
Yeah.
So there's got to be somebody in the middle.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, because taxes in U.S. history, they essentially come down to two distinct groups of people that I'm sure in your civics class or whenever you took that in middle school or wherever, you learned about two groups of people when they started the country, the founding fathers, and they were split down the middle on kind of their views on how this beautiful country should operate. One was the Federalists, right? You had Alexander Hamilton being a huge part of that movement, where he advocated for strong central government, like you're saying. They were responsible for just one big overarching government that kind of managed the states, and that's who all those decisions would fall under. And then you had the opposite side of the coin, the kind of anti-federalists, and there was plenty of people in between, but they were more states' rights, right? So that decision that you made or that you thought of, it would basically fall under either the state or the locality as opposed to the federal government, right? Which is essentially how it operates now, but in terms of schools and things like that. But yeah, and those were, you had Patrick Henry being a huge, fiery anti-federalist of, we create a strong federal government, there's going to be tyranny and all of that, right? I think both sides are right on certain things, both sides are wrong on certain things, but that's kind of where taxes, modern day taxes, kind of started to evolve from. And using your exact point, it's who makes that decision, and I think that is the overarching question of taxes in general.
That's really interesting. I've never thought about that. I think of Florida, and a lot of people go there because, there's no income tax, and you go, okay, well, they get it in different ways. So are you saying that the early founders, where they disagreed, it was almost like that's where the states came up with their own system, and you as a citizen could be like, okay, I like the way Florida does it, or I like the way Montana does it, and now I get to choose. And then what we've gotten, I guess, to kind of play that all the way out, because the current administration keeps talking about putting stuff back on the states. And so have we kind of gone that route where the federal government has gotten involved in so many places, and the non-federalists, I guess, as it were, want them to. I guess this is a rambling question because there's a lot to unpack there. But again, we're talking taxes, so whether the federal government decides to spend the money or the states, at the end of the day, it's it comes from the federal taxes we pay and then the state taxes. So are you saying that people want the federal government to decide less, and their individual states can do things?
Yeah.
Or what do they want? What would they want if they? I guess I go to the extreme. If they want less federal involvement, or they're not a federalist, what would the role of the federal government be then?
And that was the big debate, right? What is the role of that federal government? And the role of the federal government for the vast majority, right? There were some extremist anti-federalists and some extremist federalists, but the vast majority on both sides kind of agreed that the federal government's role was to protect its people. That primarily meant like militarily, economically. So that's when you get into the treasury and things like that, where we make sure that the currency of our country as a whole, because if you left that to the states, it'd be a clusterfuck. Right. So there's certain things that for the protection of the people that they would be responsible for. But in terms of taxes, that going back, like that would be up to the states. And, if you live in a certain area, which we have now, right? We have federal taxes and we have state taxes. The thought process there was like, if we have 2 roads in our city or our town and 4 stoplights, and this other city like New York City has a huge amount of those resources, like you can't take that breakdown of tax income and spend it equally. You know what I mean? So if it's broken out on a locality basis or a state basis, that makes more sense. And then you can also use those taxes differently, right? Like if everything was left to the states, maybe you could do more with agriculture out in Idaho. Whereas for Florida, maybe it's to protect inland, like natural habitats and fisheries or whatever it is, right? It's by putting it in the state's hands, you allow each state to spend the money on the things that make that state what it is, as opposed to the federal government, where when they take that, it's kind of a blanket sweep of like, we're all going to do this. And that's kind of where both sides differ.
Another thought there. The federal government has, so when you were talking about like natural resources and all that, when a hurricane comes through and, you declare a state of emergency and I guess you get federal funds. So I guess the federal government's also, it's not insurance, but they're also squirreling away money for a rainy day, right? How do you think Dave Ramsey feels about do you think that he thinks the government should snowball their debt?
Oh, I don't know. That's a deep question. We'd probably do a whole podcast on what ifs for Dave Ramsey. I don't know.
What would David say?
I don't know. But yeah, no, that's a good point. I think I don't think the answer is as black as white as they tried to make it, right, with the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And I think that's the whole thing with taxes of like, yeah, some go to good things, but some also go to things that make 0 sense. And I think it's become such a norm now in modern society because we've all gotten used to it. Everybody listening to this and everybody out there for the most part was not alive even in the period where there weren't really a ton of income taxes, right? We talked about it on the last episode about how predominantly for the vast majority of American history, tariffs and other things were how we made the money. And then that money was then used for the exact same projects and expenditures that our taxes are used for now, except we got the money a different way instead of from the people. States had state income tax and all that, but no one was alive before, or not a lot of people living today were alive before that. So it's kind of become this norm that we've all gotten used to, and I don't necessarily know if it's the right answer.
Yeah. You said black and white. What taxes and what your share of the tax burden is should 1,000% be pretty black and white.
Yeah. And it's not.
It's not.
Not even close.
It's just wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's been a lot of people throughout the years that have tried to advocate for that. And I don't know why, I'm not well versed in this as to why there's been a lot of pushback, but like there's been a lot of people who have said, let's just do 10% for everybody. Right. And I don't necessarily think that works, but like wrap it all up, like capital gains, everything, no matter what, any money that you make, you pay 10% of, and you could have brackets for that too. But, prior to like the 30s, late 30s, prior to like World War II, right? Then there weren't a lot of taxes in terms of income taxes, right? And I think that's the big focus here. It's like the income tax, right?
Yeah.
And so, but then in the 50s, I think it was like, there was like 500,000 words, and I could be ballparking here, but feel free to fact check me, anyone listening. But I think in the 50s, it was like 500,000 words to the tax law or tax code. And I think now we're at like 4 million plus.
Yeah. And that, that actually makes sense to me, logically speaking, because if we go through the history like we like to do, where did this come from and how did we get here? The first time they said, all right, let's start taxing the citizens, you put together a 3-page doc. And then somebody comes along and says, well, my kids aren't using that school. Why am I paying that tax? And they go, okay, well, here's an exemption for this. And you go on and on and on, and here's all these exemptions. It's out of control for sure. You mentioned capital gains. I think this is going to be a good exercise. Let's go through the different buckets or what we can maybe try and go high level enough of the different buckets, because I think a lot of people, if you're just 9 to 5, you've only ever had like W-2 income. You only think income tax. One interesting thing I heard a couple years ago when we talked about capital gains, I want your opinion on this. When you are, and you want me to use the hole digging example again?
Yeah.
Okay, you're a hole digger.
Yes.
You shovel dirt.
Yes.
You are providing utility to the world. Somebody needed that. Somebody needed to get underground. Somebody needed to run a line. When you are trading stocks, and on Monday you bought at 10 and Tuesday you sold at 12, you've provided absolutely zero utility to planet Earth. You've done nothing. And I told you that a while back I got into a little bit of options trading, trying to figure it out. I never went anywhere with it, but I thought I was like, okay, this could be cool. But that really stuck with me, because you're literally doing nothing. You are providing no utility.
Yeah.
So then they say, okay, well, you've just invented money with short-term trading. I want 35% of that.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of, we're talking about a simple or complex tax code. I kind of like the higher end on that cap gain. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a debate that we could go on for a while. I think it like you said earlier when you pointed out, that one person that was like, well, my kids don't go to this school, I shouldn't have to pay this. No, all right, well, here's an exemption for that. I think it falls into that bucket, right? Of, do you completely screw up the stock market or anything like this? Do you completely screw up that entire industry by simplifying it as such? And what I mean by that is, let's say that guy goes and day trading makes 10% return. Okay. And you want to take, of that 10%, you want to take 35% of it. Whereas that guy that made that 10%, and now he's taking that and he goes and puts that in something else and doesn't get, and he loses it. Does he get 35% back for losing it? Absolutely not. Right. So I think that is the way it is now, right, is they look at the net, right?
Sure.
Then they say like, all right, you made 10% here, you lost 5% there of the exact same amount of money. Here's your net, and then we'll take 35% of that. And I think that's a fair way of doing it.
You're talking about like kind of like write-offs, or like what you're, yeah.
Yeah, they look at like bigger picture, right? Like, and I think a lot of people, and I think that's a fair thing. I'm totally in support of, to your point, of capital gains tax, in the sense of, a stock trader or especially a day trader, somebody making money. What I think is insane, and I don't know if we want to go down this rabbit hole, is unrealized gains, unrealized capital gains, right? So if you have equity in a company and that company grew at 20% that year, and plenty of people out there in the political world want to tax that, even though you haven't cashed it out, you haven't done anything, it's just sitting there. They want you to pay taxes on that.
I've got a ton of thoughts. I'm going to jump right in. One, we can go down this path. I want to get back to the buckets, though. Let's not forget that. I want to get back to that.
Yeah.
We've been talking about, through these first bunch of episodes, money's not real. What's less real than an unrealized gain anyways? All of these, whether it's a capital gains tax or whatever, these are ways to incentivize a population as well. So if I don't think your day trading has utility to the world, I can tax that higher and say, fine, you can do it, but you're chipping in more since you're just sitting in your house in a dark room staring at a computer screen. The unrealized gains, a lot of times you can borrow against that. Or if you say, like, if I have a portfolio, I can borrow against that. Now there is a very easy way, if you have an unrealized gain, and I'm drawing a blank, maybe you can come up with a specific example, but I can leverage that, air quotes, unrealized gain to do something else, never contributing to the system. So
yeah, for sure.
I agree. It's weird to say, hey, one day you're going to make, and because they're going to tax you when you make it too.
Right.
So
right. And that's the whole thing, right? And I think that you could, because you're right? Like Bezos can go and lever his own holdings and say, I'm going to go buy this $1 billion mansion, right? and that's super easy for him. Even though it's still just sitting there, he doesn't take it out. But at the same time, that property he's going to pay property taxes on, and he's going to pay stuff like that. But I think it all comes back to your point earlier of how complex it's all become, right? Because the only reason that it works for him and he can get around those things is because how complex the tax code is.
You mentioned he ends up paying property taxes, and it's a wider like swath. The guy that's like, my kids don't go to school. Why do I need to pay a education tax or like whatever? Or I don't have kids, and I don't want to pay. Yeah, there is a broader thing here that we are. Maybe I don't drive on the road that goes by your house. Maybe my kid, once he's out of school, is going to cut your yard. And not that you need an education to cut the grass, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's sort of this American shared values of making each other better and being a community. That's not apparent, I think, in some of these things. So again, going back to the people at the dinner table, they're like, I didn't have the appetizer and you had a bottle of wine and I only drank water. We're all at dinner having fun together, and maybe I wouldn't be a fun guest without that bottle of wine.
Yeah. But I think that's the beauty of, and that this is kind of where I would side in the bucket of the anti-federalists in this aspect. I think that's the beauty of democracy and capitalism, and to that extent as well. May the best man win, right? And I think you see it with states, because there are state income taxes and state property and locality property taxes and things like that. And you see that, right? You see people leaving California in droves to go other places because of that tax, right? So to your point of, I don't drive past that road, or I don't live near that road, or I don't have kids. Great. But over time, you just won't live there, right? And that's the decision that the local government can make for itself and for its people and its constituents, as opposed to the federal government being like, well, I don't give a shit if you don't have kids. Like, I don't give a shit if you don't drive past that road. We're going to build a highway and relocate inner cities and drive straight through them and do this because it's for the betterment of our own agenda of whatever that may be.
That's interesting, because I kind of, when I've done TurboTax in the past, and it's like, okay, let me copy this over to state. The state's almost an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's like the federal's the one that it's like nonsense.
Yes.
And I guess it seems like it might be better off the other way around, at least to be an anti-federalist, to your point.
Make the federal one simpler, and then the states can do a lot more.
Going back to the different buckets. So we obviously know income tax. We've talked about capital gains, so money you make on investments. In the stock market, right? Capital gains, you talk about like a stock market investment. Real estate taxes is a big one. What's another high-level bucket? Those are the three that come to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, so personal property, right? That's a huge one. So home, car, boat, all those things. And then income, capital gains. I mean, and then you can go back into taxes you pay on purchases.
Like sales tax.
Yep, sales tax.
I hear you, but you're not doing sales tax on your tax return.
No,
at the end of the year.
No, yeah.
So if we're talking, when you go to file your taxes, you might have income tax, you might have capital gains tax, and maybe you have some sort of real estate tax. And when I say real estate, I mean investment real estate, because your home, you get to write off. Speaking of incentives, the government wants home ownership to enhance a sense of community. So they say, I'll let you write off the interest you paid on your mortgage, right? So when I say real estate, I don't mean like the home that you're in. And when you talk about the ultra wealthy, I had that study from earlier. I don't have the study on this one handy.
Yeah.
The majority, I think it's fair to say the majority, made a lot of their money, most of their money, in real estate. And not just, I found a dilapidated property and turned it into a mansion, but I hid, people talk about tax shelters, they throw that term around. I wrote off my losses, or I did this to reduce my tax burden, and a lot of times down to zero. And not to continue to pick on our president, he had that case in New York where they were like, you avoided federal taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And, his counter argument was, which of course, anybody's got a counter argument because, like you said, it's 4 million words in the tax law. You can find anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess where I'm going with this is for that real estate bucket, this seems to be a spot that a lot of people use and maybe abuse. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you could make the argument that it's abused or it's not pretty easily, right? Like it's not abused because otherwise, like that helps prop up real estate in America, and that's the backbone of America. But then, yeah, it is absolutely a way to get out or avoid, or there's a few, right? There's plenty of things that they use to avoid it. It's almost like legal money laundering to a certain extent, where you are doing some, especially if it's in like a tax shelter, right? Like there's a when you make a lot of money, obviously art is one of those really high value things. But if you look at it, it's really only high value because of the fact that it's a way for people to avoid things, to avoid paying taxes or whatever, right? They'll
Art is?
Yeah, or at least a store of money in a sense of by buying things, and because if you're buying things, maybe you're buying them for a entity that you set up that is technically like an LLC or a business, and that entity is loans out these art pieces to museums. Okay, there you go. Right? You could, to your point of 4 million words, you could go buy and spend millions of dollars in art that's now valued at a certain amount, and it's stored in some island somewhere or in some giant temperate warehouse that then gets loaned out once a year to this little tiny museum and then goes right back into that thing. You never even see it. It's not in your house or anything like that, but it's a way to avoid it, right? And then Grant Cardone is famous for saying he was going to have to pay a ton of taxes, and so he went and bought like a G5 jet within like 48 hours. And he called a guy like 2 days before his taxes were due. And like, I have to get rid of this amount of money so I don't pay even more money, right? If he didn't spend millions, he would have to pay like 50 million, let's say, or whatever it was. And so he went and bought a jet. And so there's just, real estate is obviously one of them, but asset buying is kind of the whole group.
Yeah. And so on a micro level, a lot of small business owners do that too, right? Like, they went to dinner and they write that off, and which is fine. I just don't know where getting back to the black and white conversation. And that's not the first time I've heard that. I have a friend who owns a company in town, and years ago I was like, oh, nice Tahoe or whatever he had bought, and he kind of laughed, and same exact thing. He said, my tax guy said, we had a tax bill, but if we go and get new vehicles, like it works out to be the exact same thing. And so he was like, we upgraded.
Uh-huh. Which makes sense, right? It makes sense because what does the government care about more? Being out of debt or the quarterly economic numbers, right?
Back to incentives.
Right. They care about the economy and how it looks infinitely more than being out of debt or reducing that debt or anything like that, because that's what people vote with. They vote with how well they feel they're doing, or how many fun trinkets they have, what kind of car they drive, the house that they're in. They don't give a shit if you went from $21 trillion in debt to 20 in 4 years.
What a spectacular point. And I think too, I think I miss the point on this sometimes too, that there's even in that I went and bought a jet, I bought a car, I went to dinner and I wrote that off as an expense. I paid sales tax or, dining tax at the restaurant. I paid sales tax on the car. So there's money being moved around. But what a spectacular point about how people operate, and just keeping the wheels turning. And it goes again, none of it's real. These are all just numbers in the sky, and we're just moving it from one bucket to another.
Yeah,
I did too. I had one of the classes I went to in college, and I say that very purposefully because I didn't go to a lot of them, but I'm an economics major. I don't know if you know that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you need economics,
I learned that last time.
let me know. Yep. It was a business class. It was a class I really enjoyed actually. And I think it was kind of like one of the intro to business classes or high level. And the professor was talking about charity and saying, if you see a guy, like somebody homeless, don't give them $5, don't give them $10. If you really want to help them, start a business and go give them a job. I think that makes sense at a high level. I think where it gets construed or misused maybe is because let's pivot over to this direction too. There's a lot of complaining about Facebook, Apple, Amazon, that they're not paying their share of the tax burden.
Sure.
And their counter argument is just that. Well, look at all this. Look at all these things I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do you have a line where you would in the sand where you would draw on that stuff?
Oh yeah, and it's going to sound extreme, but I think their business taxes are absolute insanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's, in my own personal view, right? I think business taxes are absolutely crazy, and I'll kind of tell you why. Businesses are going to spend. They're always going to spend, unless you're Apple and you just hoard cash in a vault somewhere, right? And then billions and hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. Otherwise, they're going to spend, right? Amazon being a famous example of that, right? They weren't profitable for the first, 20 years of their existence because every penny they made, they spent to grow. Google, very similar. I mean, companies spend and they're going to spend. Any business is just going to keep trying to grow. No business is just going to like hoard cash if you let them. The worst case scenario is...
Hold it right there, because cash is a weapon. They're going to use that to, right.
They're either going to use it to grow the business, they're going to use it to buy a business, or they're going to use it to pay their employees. So if you're taxing the employees, you've got that base covered. If they're going to use it to grow the business or buy another business or whatever, that's going to stimulate the economy. That's going to keep things moving forward. So why would you tax the cash if those are the three options they're going to use it for? Why double tax, right? Why not just let them either grow or pay their employees, and then you take it from the employees?
Because I think if I'm understanding your point, my counter argument would be because the business owner is a human being and he's not incentivized to be morally just in his decision making. And I agree with you that if a business owner, you have a really successful hole digging business and you're really starting to make some money. Now I'm going to hire more people or I'm going to invest in another business. Okay, I'm not going to tax that because you're doing all these things. But what happens is they buy the jet, or they buy a mansion, or they put the mansion in the LLC, and then this becomes this and that becomes that. And it's not that. Now it's just enriching yourself, which, again, we're humans. We are going to always be looking out for number one.
Yeah.
So I don't know a ton about how businesses get taxed in general or why. I know it's very polarizing, where some people are like Amazon should pay $5 billion, and I think to your point, or what your point is, they should pay zero. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to what we talked about the first 5 minutes of this episode. Is it's just so complex, right? But that's not the business's problem. The fact that the income tax, the personal income tax code is so huge and so convoluted and all of that isn't the business's fault. And I think the big problem I have with federal taxes in general, business taxes, income taxes, property, whatever it is, the biggest issue I have is it's almost as if they're trying to penalize a certain small subset of entities from the business's perspective, entities or corporations, or in the income tax, certain individuals, a certain bracket of individuals, and they're trying to catch them, right? Or they're trying to do something to say, like, you guys need to pay this or whatever. And the fallout of that is penalizing the other 90% of us, 95% of us, and business owners in particular, right? It is so vastly difficult to start a business in the U.S., right? Back in the day, if you wanted to start we'll use lemonade stand as an example here, because that's been in the news many times because of certain business codes and stuff, where 50 years ago, if you wanted to start a lemonade stand and you were a 15-year-old kid and you did well, and you could go out and have another lemonade stand in the neighborhood next door, and you could pay some kids there and you could grow it. And that was that, right? You started a business, you could grow it. And that's how almost every single business was And now you see these kids where police come up and they're like, "Wait, you don't have the permits to sell lemonade, right? Or, are you a legal entity? Are you?" And it's kind of like, it's just so convoluted the way that it is now. That tiny, tiny example just gets even bigger as you start looking at things, especially on the business side of things, where it's like, why am I paying taxes on this? Like I could use this. And I'll give you an example with the most recent administration. Like when the proposed business taxes came out, I remember talking to our accountant with it. And when Biden put the Biden administration put out the new business rates and stuff for taxes, and kind of calculating how much I was going to pay now for the business that I had at the time, I could have hired 2 employees just off the amount of taxes I had to pay. And it's like, what's better, right? And I agree with you. There's so many people that would be like, I'm not going to hire the employees. I'm just going to put it in my pocket. But then you can tax them on that side. And in an ideal world, if you can resolve the actual income tax, but simply because you haven't resolved the income tax doesn't mean you should penalize the businesses for that.
I'm with you there. It's a mom and pop LLC, in my opinion, should be treated differently than a large enterprise.
I agree.
But
as we've seen with the income tax, like how the hell is that going to work? How are we going to pull that off? It's kind of my point. And if it's one or the other, I'd rather just say let the mega corporations have nothing if it means that the small businesses have nothing as well.
The point about it flows down through income taxes. I have a successful business. I hire 5 people. They're paying that income tax.
Mm-hmm.
The caveat there, when you talk about the Amazons of the world or some of the bigger players, again, with the money funneling to the top, that money's not trickling down. And if we're taxing businesses as a way to go back to your point, you said, oh, I could have hired 2 employees.
Yeah.
Well, James, why didn't you?
Yeah.
Why didn't you hire 2 employees?
Taxes.
Well, no, you said if you had hired the 2 employees, then it would have been the same thing as paying that tax.
No, I mean, like with the amount of money, if the new tax rates hadn't have been proposed, right, then the amount of money I would have saved by not having to pay that tax, I could have used to hire 2 employees.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
If you're making, it's like anything else. We all have to carry it. I don't think, because of the way the money trickles down, this is where I'm going with. If your business is blowing up, you're not sharing that money necessarily with your employees. There's plenty of things out there, 401ks, stock, employee stock purchase plans, bonuses, and all that. That seems to be window dressing. But at the end of the day, Grant Cardone's buying a jet, not having an employee who's got a mansion. Going back to incentives, if your business is very successful and that money is trickling down, I agree with you. It would make sense to tax that business at a high rate. We have become so convoluted because I think it did used to be, oh, I'm going to hire a company, an employee, and that was sort of like a badge of honor. Now it's like, now all these businesses are beholden to the shareholders anyways.
Yeah.
So that money's not trickling down. So you got to get it somewhere. And if you're going to tax that business for that, then so be it.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you one counter argument to this. How many millionaires, multimillionaires has Amazon created? But just employees wise, or Google or Apple, or, like came on board thousands, tens of thousands,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, but how? Not through W-2.
No, through equity, right?
Yeah.
But imagine how many more there could have been had they been able to take the excess cash that they didn't have to pay taxes on or whatever and reinvest that, right? And then I'll kind of go a step further.
Well, before you go a step further, let me answer your question. I say 0.
Possibly. So in a worst case scenario, all that does, by having no business taxes or anything like that, all that does is make the rich even richer, right? You end up with like another Rockefeller, just a level of wealth that even Elon Musk can't even fathom. All right, I think he had like, just Rockefeller alone had like 1/16 of the US GDP in his pocket, which is bananas. So let's say that occurs. How many generations before that family has no money left anyway? Which means, where's that money go? Back into the economy eventually, right? It might not be while we see it necessarily, but what does taxes achieve federal off of that? Is the federal government going to spend that properly? Or would it be better to, and I don't know the answer. I'm just proposing this as a counter argument, right? There's a reason that I think it's what, by the third generation of a wealthy individual, it's always gone or almost always gone, right?
Well,
And
don't they say that because the children aren't motivated to do anything and they blow it?
Right. But you could see that with like the, Rockefellers or that the Astors, right? Or whoever, whatever famous rich family 100, 200 years ago, like, yeah, they may have the name and they may be okay, but like they're not billionaires. They don't have 1/16 of the US GDP, right? They don't have an endless supply of money anymore. The reason being is because they have spent it. It's gone. It's gone somewhere, which is back into the economy, back into people's pockets that then spur up new industries and new businesses and things like that.
I think you lost me on that one.
Mm.
If I'm a trillionaire and your point is don't tax that guy because he's going to put it back by living a luxurious lifestyle, is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I'm saying and not from a tax perspective on income tax. I'm talking tax on business, right? If in the worst case scenario, you eliminate business taxes entirely, and all that does is it obviously will stimulate small businesses, and that's a guaranteed. But what it does is it also just makes the wealthy even wealthier, let's say. What I'm saying is, and like I said, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if this is even good.
No, I'm not trying to.
But there is this statistic of how many generations does it take before they're broke again or back to average, where that money goes somewhere. So even if they get richer, it's still going to be blown somewhere, whether it's a jet or whether it's, at the end of the day, it usually is going to be diluted through children who are then going to spend it and spend it and spend it and spend it. And that's going to stimulate the economy in some way, shape, or form. Whereas otherwise, it just gets locked up into a government that's just going to continue to rack up debt.
I see. I guess my opinion is, and I'm not, what I was getting ready to say is would sound very, I don't know if it's socialist or it's communist, and that's not what I think. But I do think that I would rather see that trillionaire pay either a business tax or because his business, he's not paying himself income, right? He's not saying, hey, I want $1 million from my business that he's going to pay income tax on. That's not how that works. So he's not paying enough, or he's not paying some. And you're right, we don't have the numbers of how that comes back into the economy. Does it end up being more in taxes through sales tax or whatever else? I guess my opinion is I would rather go after him or find a way to tax that than the local handyman or local plumber or even local W-2 guy who's not sure what he's typing into TurboTax or he's not sure what tax bracket he should be in. And now he's got to pay $1, $2, $3 at the end of the year.
Yeah.
That sounds like a pivot back to my initial story, but it's not. That's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Like for me personally. I'm just saying in general, I'd rather see this sort of lower income side. And maybe it becomes a minimum. Maybe you say you have to earn a certain, and I'm sure it's in the tax code somewhere. I'm kind of rambling around my idea here, but I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Okay.
I get what you're saying. I think again though, we end up just running into the same issues of the way that the current tax system is, where it almost penalizes you for becoming more successful, or it penalizes you for growing your business even more. So you may get to that point where you're teetering on that edge, and you could be creating the next Google, or you could be creating the next Apple, and you're like, well, maybe I'll just sell it. Maybe maybe I won't keep growing it. Maybe I'll do this. And not to say that does happen. It may never happen, right? It's just just wrapping this all up for taxes. I think my biggest issue is just how complex it is.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we segment it out and say, well, if this, then that, the more of those that we have in it, the worse things become. I think the simpler you make it, better for everyone.
Yep. And it goes back to and it is complex. And you can tell it's complex. This is our longest podcast we've ever done
Yeah.
because there is so much here.
Yeah.
And I'm excited in the future to go deeper on some of these specific subjects. But I think what it also relates to, and that the big piece here is, and you led with it, what are we doing with these funds? What do we need them for? And who's in charge to make that efficient? What do we actually need? What do we not need? And that's the tough part, is because that's sort of the part of the equation that's easy to solve for. It's like, we need X. I mean, that opinion varies too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
It's a near impossible thing to figure out. It's something that we still haven't gotten right.
Another Control Alt Invest is in the books, James. I've got to run because I have to file my taxes. So I've got to bolt. Till next time.
All right.